When you immigrate to a developed country from a developing or an underdeveloped nation, you have a lot of cultural shocks. You have a lot of, pleasant and not so pleasant surprises when you move and immigrate. And what may be luxury back home may be very, very normal and a general and common thing here. So, this is what exactly we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the differences in housing and standard of living, and I'm going to compare it to Canada and where I come from, India, and also even Nepal. As we all know, Canada is a fully developed country, and Nepal is underdeveloped, and India is on the cusp of or in between developing and almost developed. I don't really know at this point, but it's definitely less developed than Canada. There are a few things that I thought that if I need to achieve those things in life, I need to be really, really rich, especially inside my house. But turns out that some things are like really common and general and easily accessible here. And I thought that it'll be an interesting thing to talk about. And I'm going to just like connect it to housing and focus just on housing for today because we talk about all things housing and home related here on Homebound Canada. So let's get started. So, the number one thing that I want to talk about is access to bathtubs. Back home in India and Nepal, bathtub is something that is known to be only available to really rich people. I remember as a child when I used to go to someone's house who had a bathtub, I used to automatically assume that these people are really, really rich. And most of the times they were. So for me, to have a bathtub in the house was something like I really need to work hard for. I had to be rich to build a bathtub. And even as a child, when I used to ask my parents to build me a bathtub, they used to tell me that, okay, maybe we can, we'll just think about it. It was not so common. And then you really need to have like a big space for a bathtub, as we all know. But here in Canada, it turns out that every house and every condo and every apartment, any type of a house, bathtub is something that is easily accessible and available, which was kind of a pleasant surprise for me when I moved here. If there are, let's say, three bathrooms in the house, at least two of them will have a bathtub, or even like all bathrooms will have a bathtub. And some bathrooms will also have like a jacuzzi kind of a setup. And I've seen so many people coming from different economic backgrounds and have visited their houses. And one thing which is common is bathtub. So I think that was very interesting for me to figure out that this is something which is considered luxury and for rich people back home. And this is having a bathtub inside a house is so common in Canada. Now let's move on to appliances because why not? We are so dependent on appliances in and around the house. Let's talk about the most common appliances, which I don't think anybody in Canada can think of living without, which are the washing machines and dryers. Washing machine and dryer is not something very common in India and in Nepal. Especially in Nepal, I don't even think if I go to 10 houses, out of those 10 houses, 7 houses in Nepal would not have a washing machine. In India, it's getting a bit popular and people are relying more and more on washing machines. But what is not common at all back home are the dryers. In places, in many South Asian countries, I'm sure people highly rely on drying their clothes out in the terrace, on that rope. So that's what they commonly do. So it's not a very common thing for people to have dryers and washing machines back home. But if I ask someone here in Canada and they mention that they don't have a washing machine, I think that's a very uncommon thing for someone to mention. Even if they do not have an access to washing machine and dryer, they often go to the laundromat and dry their clothes and wash their clothes there. I know it's not really an option in a country like Canada during winters to dry their clothes outside because of the snow and whatnot. But even during the summer, it's not a very common thing to do to dry our clothes outside. It's very rare that I have seen people drying their clothes outside in their lawn or their backyards. There's not much of a concept of a terrace here. That's also something that I have discovered because of the snow. There's no concept of having a terrace here in Canada. It's only the backyards and the front yards that are available to you, and people heavily rely on dryers and washing machine to wash their clothes. I think we have stepped into the topic of home management now, and which makes me want to talk about another massive difference in housing and standard of living in these two countries that we are talking about, which is access to cheap labor. The most common reason that people do not have appliances like dishwasher or washing machine is because they have access to cheap labor. It is very, very easy to hire labor back home in India and Nepal. And you can afford to hire someone to have someone come and cook for you, to do your dishes, to fold clothes for you, to clean your house, to wash your clothes, and that person washes the clothes by hand. Like they do not use washing machine to wash your clothes. They often like go to the terrace, take your clothes and wash it by hand, use a soap and wash it by hand, and then dry it on the terrace. Now if you want to hire help in Canada, it's almost impossible for a middle class person or a person who does normal 9 to 5 and earns average or even above average salary to do so, because labor is not cheap here. That just adds to the stress of home owning and home management. Many people try to DIY, because hiring a plumber or hiring a carpenter or hiring an electrician means you are at least spending $500 on that. So this accessibility of cheap labor in India is really helpful. And when I came here and I figured out the cost of like plumbers or electricians or like any kind of professional job that I want to get done, even painting. I painted this whole house myself with the help of my family and friends. But if I thought of like hiring someone like a painter, then it was something that I could not afford. So this is also something that was so different for me and kind of difficult to adjust when it came to being an immigrant and moving to Canada. But yeah, I guess many people also kind of exploit this cheap labor back home in India, and having like a system and a systematic way of doing things is always good. But at the same time, it's a massive difference between countries like India and Canada when it comes to cheap labor and hiring cheap labor. Centralized heating, centralized cooling, luxury back home. All immigrants will relate to this fact when I say that having centralized heating inside a house, especially during the winters and especially in a country like Canada, is an absolute luxury. Back home, whenever there's winter, especially in a cold country like Nepal where it gets pretty cold, we all of us depend on like these electric or gas heaters, and we all have to dress really really warm. Like all of us are in our sweaters and jackets and shawls and whatnot to keep us warm in the night, and our quilts are really really heavy when we sleep in the night. There is no concept of centralized heating at all. Even if there is, like I mentioned in the previous point about bathtubs, it's always a rich people thing. Middle class people or lower middle class people cannot really afford centralized heating or even centralized cooling. So, moving here to Canada and realizing that this is a common thing, that heating is something that is expected to be very common, the centralized heating here, and how it's like a common thing and not a luxury thing at all to have centralized heating in your home, and how you can relax in the winter during the winter is something that was again very surprising to me. But at the same time, I just realized that we do really miss out on these kind of things back home. Same thing with air conditioning during summer, especially in a country like India where it gets really, really hot. The temperatures go beyond like 45 degrees sometimes in summer, especially in the northern part of India. Even the southern part of India, it gets really humid. Um, Air conditioning is something still very, very new and considered as luxury. I think only middle class people are already rich, like the upper class people can afford to have air conditioning inside the house. People who do not come from very privileged background or very high economic background cannot afford air conditioning. They often rely on fans, but air conditioning is not really something that is very common back in India. It's getting common now for middle class people. They buy something called like the split AC, like I put it on here, or there's something called window AC, similar to this. but people still rely on fans, ceiling fans or table fans, or even just, staying out in the heat and just doing whatever they can to avoid the heat. A funny part about this is when I used to video call my friends and family back home, especially during peak winter in January and February, and I used to be in my like shorts and sleeveless clothes, they often used to ask me, "Are you not feeling cold? Why are you not wearing clothes? And you should wear some jacket or like cover yourself up." And I used to explain to them that, um, there is centralized heating, so I don't really have to put like that many clothes on even during winters. And they used to like mock me and tease me, saying that, "Oh, now you've become this big rich person who's moved abroad and has centralized heating in her house." But little do they know that it's a very common thing here, and almost everybody has access to centralized heating. Another big housing thing, and something that is really different, is basements. Basements is not something that is very common in India. Basement is considered to be something really bad and scary, and not a good thing to live in. So if you go to houses in India and in Nepal, I don't think you will see basements at all. I don't think it's a common thing. It's a very rare thing. People might have basements. A storeroom is something that is very, very common in India and Nepal, where they have a room just to store things and they just call it storeroom. There's no concept of basement, let alone living in this basement. Many people now, especially who immigrate here, live in the basement on rent, because initially that's all they can afford, right? Renting a basement is cheaper than renting like a whole house or a condo. And then it's, I think, like a cultural shock to many immigrants who immigrate here, because it's obviously difficult to adjust in something like a basement, for people who have lived in like these full houses with like natural lighting and like big spaces, and suddenly they're shoved inside a basement, which is so dark. And some people even tend to feel like very suffocated and claustrophobic. So this is something that is very new when you move to Canada and when you come here as an immigrant, and you will be surprised to see how common basement living is. And people often like upgrade their basement and make it look pretty, and many people turn it into a movie theater or a family movie room or a game room or even gym and everything like that. But it's not a common thing back home. Basement is something that is yet to be invented, I think, or discovered. When I talk to my parents, and we talk about like moving them here, and when you talk about them moving to Canada one day, they often tell me that whatever it is, I cannot live in a basement. Like, we cannot live in a basement. I need sunlight. I always found it cool in like movies and like series I used to watch. Like, people used to throw parties in the basement and everything. But I can understand when people say that it's difficult living in a basement. It's hard for them to adjust, because it's something which is not considered very, very good back home. Many people also believe that, oh my God, there are like scary things happening in the basement. Thanks to many movies and things that we watch, basement is something where a lot of people commit crimes and murder people. So that is a bit extreme, but I'm just saying that, this is the reason why it's not a very common thing to have basements and all of this back home. So yeah, these were a few things that I have personally noticed and wanted to talk about as an immigrant. And I wanted to kind of have a comparison of what is so different, and how is housing and way of living and standard of living different if I compare it to a country like Canada, and then the another country in comparison is India or Nepal. And I hope some of you could relate to these things that I'm talking about. And with that, it's an end to this week's video of Homebound Canada. As usual, if you like the content and if you can relate to it, please, please, please like, share, and of course, subscribe to the channel. I will see you next week. Bye bye.